Hey, what is going on, everybody? Welcome into this Thanksgiving edition of my top starts and sits for week 12 of this NFL season. As always, guys, you're going to get my top two starts and sits at quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end. So let's just go ahead, dive right into the video. You should know the drill by now. I'm going to start with the most important position in football at quarterback, and my top start, he does play tomorrow, so if you have him, make sure he's in your lineups, and definitely should maybe be considered for your top quarterback start in your daily lineups for the Thanksgiving games. My top start of the week, I am going to go with Dak Prescott against the Commanders. Commanders are giving up 20.7 points per game to quarterbacks this season. Throughout Dak's career, he's averaged at least 230. He averages 230 and a half passing yards per game. He's played the Commanders 11 times in his career. He has 19 touchdowns and only 4 interceptions, so he has a history of producing against that franchise. And then when we look at what the Washington Commanders have allowed in their last 4 games, they have allowed 2 different quarterbacks to throw over 300 yards against them, and they have given up 10 passing touchdowns and only have logged 1 interception over the last 4 games. So Dak has a history of success against them. They've been getting carved up by quarterbacks over their last 4 games, and they've been giving up a lot of touchdowns through the air as well. So Dak is a hammer start this week. My next top start, I am going to go with CJ Stroud against the Jaguars. Jaguars are giving up 18.4 points per game this season. That's the 7th most allowed across the league. Now, CJ Stroud did play the Jaguars earlier this season when the Texans beat Jacksonville. And in that game, he threw for 280 yards and had 2 touchdowns. Now, when we look at these last 4 games by the Jacksonville defense, they've allowed 2 different quarterbacks to throw over 295 yards against them, and they have allowed 7 passing touchdowns and 3 interceptions. So giving up the points throughout the season. CJ Stroud diced them up in the previous matchup, and then over these last 4 games are giving up touchdowns and air yards. So that's why I definitely do like CJ in your lineups on Sunday. My top sit of the week. Maybe you were considering streaming him or putting him in your daily lineups as a cheap play. But this is a week I definitely would not consider Russell Wilson against the Browns. The Browns are only giving up 11.3 points per game to quarterbacks this year. That is the fewest in the NFL. Over their last 4 games, only 1 quarterback has finished over 225 passing yards against them, and they have only allowed 3 passing touchdowns and have picked off the quarterback 7 times. Now, as I always say, interceptions don't count much in fantasy unless you're in a league where the commissioner has tweaked the taken away points for interceptions. But the fact that there's 7 interceptions compared to 3 passing touchdowns, this wouldn't be a good week to either stream Russell Wilson or have him in your daily lineups. Another quarterback, he's been a quality streamer at times this year. I'm going to go with a guy you want to avoid in your Thanksgiving daily lineups as well. Sam Howell against the Cowboys. Cowboys are only giving up 13.5 points per game to quarterbacks this year. That is the 5th fewest allowed in the league. And then over their last 4 games, the Cowboys have only let 1 quarterback finish over 200 passing yards. They have allowed 6 passing touchdowns, and they picked off the quarterback 3 times. So it definitely feels like if you do play Howell, either streaming him this week in your seasonal leagues, or maybe you place him in one of your Thanksgiving daily lineups, it does feel like you're going to have to hope he throws a couple touchdowns because they're not giving up a lot of yards through the air this season. Moving into my top starts and sits at running back. A guy that is going to be making his return, it is official. Kyren Williams against the Cardinals. Or is it Kyron? I don't know. I heard somebody announce it Kieran. I have not got any clarification on that, so I do apologize if I'm pronouncing that young kid's name wrong. But yeah, he's back for the Rams at the running back position. I love him this week against the Cardinals. The Cardinals are giving up 21.7 points per game this season. That is the 3rd most allowed. When the Rams played the Cardinals earlier this season, Williams actually finished with 158 rushing yards and a touchdown, so I just love that alone. Then when you look at the last 4 games, the Cardinals defense have allowed 3 different running backs to finish over 80 rushing yards, and then they have allowed 6 running back touchdowns in their last 4 games. So they've been giving up a lot of yards this season over the last 4 games, giving up those touchdowns. And then you look at that success Williams had in their first matchup against the Cardinals. That's why he's my top start of Week 12. My other top start, I am going to go with Rachaad White against the Colts. The Colts are giving up 20.6 points per game to running backs this year. That's the fourth most allowed. Grover Stewart is still on his suspension, so that's allowed teams to take advantage of that situation and find success running the ball against the Colts this season. Over their last 4 games, they've allowed 2 different running backs to finish over 70 rushing yards, and then they have actually allowed 5 running back touchdowns over their last 4 games. I factor in that a lot of teams have found success with Stewart out of that defensive front lineup for the Indianapolis Colts, and then the fact that there's been proven success against that too. So that's why I do like Rachaad White as a sneaky play, definitely a sneaky flex play this week. My top sits, I'm going to go with James Cook against the Eagles. I think my top sit every week outside of their bye week this season has been whatever running back's playing against the Eagles. Eagles are only giving up 9.3 points per game this season. That's the fewest in the NFL. Only one running back has finished over 60 rushing yards against them in the last 4 games. That was Isaiah Pacheco this past Monday night. And then they have not allowed a running back touchdown in their last 4 games as well. So they're very stout against the run, so I definitely would not consider having. Definitely would not want James Cook in my lineup. My other top sit. This is kind of a temper your expectation play in seasonal leagues, because I think you definitely gotta at this point when you're making a push for the playoffs, you got to consider having Jonathan Taylor in your lineup, unless you have better or at least quality of talent running backs with a better matchup to play over him. But yeah, Jonathan Taylor and Zach Moss, definitely would leave Zach Moss out of my lineups against the Bucks this weekend. Again, with this matchup, let's look at it. The Buccaneers are only giving up 11.7 points per game this season. That is the second fewest allowed. Only one running back over the last 4 games finished over 75 rushing yards against the Bucks, and that was Christian McCaffrey. Obviously, he's that level of talent where you got to hope that he can exceed the expectations, but then you also got to factor in Derrick Henry only gained 24 yards against the Bucks a couple weeks ago. Now, obviously, Derrick Henry's not the same level of back that he once was just last year, a couple years ago. But you also got to factor in their offensive line's a little banged up. And then moving on, only one running back has scored a touchdown against them in the last 4 games. That's Christian McCaffrey. So again, seasonal leagues, Jonathan Taylor, I got him in a league. I have to not only win these games to make the playoffs in that league, but I also need the points, so I'm going to play Jonathan Taylor just for the fact that he might hit his ceiling this week. But I'm playing him with lowered expectations. I'm tempering my expectations. But when I do my FanDuel lineups or my DraftKings lineups, when I do my daily lineups this weekend, I'm definitely going to be avoiding Taylor this week just because of the matchup that Colts have against that very stout run defense in Tampa Bay. Moving into my top starts and sits at wide receiver, my top start is going to be Gabe Davis, and I think a sneaky play, especially on the FanDuel lineups, because he'll be relatively cheap, is going to be Khalil Shakir against the Eagles. Obviously, you're going to start Stephon Diggs. I don't want to tell you that, so that's why you don't see his name on this list. But I like Gabe Davis and Khalil Shakir as sneaky plays this week, going against the Eagles defense, who are allowing the most points per game to wide receivers this year, giving up 25.9 points a game. Over their last 4 games, they have allowed 4 different wide receivers to go over 85 receiving yards, and they've given up 7 wide receiver touchdowns in their last 4 games. So given the success that teams have found throwing the ball against the Eagles defense, and you like to think that they would double team Stephon Diggs, and that should definitely open up things for Gabe Davis and Shakir to have some success against the Philadelphia defense on Sunday. Moving into my second start, it's going to be Brandon Cooks against the Commanders. Again, I don't have to tell you to play CeeDee Lamb at this point. So yeah, I do like Brandon Cooks as a sneaky play this week as well. Going against that Commanders defense tomorrow on Thanksgiving. So he gives you a player that you can watch with your family when you're eating all that great Thanksgiving food. Love the matchup for him this week, going against the Commanders defense, who's given up 27.6 points per game over the last over the course of the season. It looks like I have a typo here, but they've allowed 4 different wide receivers, I believe, to finish over 90 yards over their last 4 games, giving up a lot of yardage as well. And then they have also allowed 6 wide receiver touchdowns in their last 4 games. So, like I said, I love Dak this week, so I definitely love Brandon Cooks, and CeeDee Lamb's definitely going to blow up as well, of course. Moving into my top sit, actually sitting in that, staying in that second Thanksgiving game tomorrow, I'm going to go with Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson against the Cowboys. Now, you might not have an equal talent to play over McLaurin, so if you do play him in your seasonal leagues, I would just temper your expectations with McLaurin this week. If you happen to have a better option, I would definitely consider playing that player over McLaurin, but I definitely would avoid Jahan Dotson in seasonal leagues. And then as far as daily lineups, these are both names when I put my Thanksgiving lineups for those daily leagues, I'm going to be avoiding tomorrow. The reason why, when you look at this matchup, Cowboys are only giving up 16.4 points per game, 2 wide receivers this year. That is the 4th fewest allowed in the NFL. Now, when we look at the career, Terry McLaurin only averages 53.3 receiving yards per game against Dallas. And then over the last 5 times that McLaurin has played against the Cowboys, he only has 1 touchdown in those 5 games. And then when we look at Dotson, he's only played the Dallas Cowboys twice. He does average 57.5 receiving yards against them. He only has 1 touchdown in those 2 games. It's a small sample size, but since I presented the McLaurin career history against Dallas, I thought I should definitely bring up what Dotson has at least done so far in 2 games against the Cowboys. Now, when we look at the Cowboys over their last 4 games, only 1 wide receiver finished over 70 yards against them, and that was Adam Thielen. And then the second most was 65 yards, and that was by A.J. Brown. And we know how great A.J. Brown has been this season. Now, they have given up 3 wide receiver touchdowns over the last 4 games, so if you do play McLaurin or Dotson, it does feel like they are a touchdown-dependent wide receivers this week to have a good quality week to have them in your lineups. My other top sit, I'm going to go with DeAndre Hopkins against the Panthers. And some people might be like, man, the Panthers are terrible. Why would you not want to play anybody against them? Well, it's because teams run the ball against them, so they don't have to throw the ball against Carolina's defense since they're so successful on the ground attack. And then usually teams are beating up on the Panthers, so by the time that it gets to the second half of the game, the game script has gone run heavy, so they're not having to throw the ball a lot. Like, I have pretty much rehashed that in different ways over the last 10 seconds. So let me just move on. Let's take a look at the data points. As far as what they're doing over the season in fantasy, the Panthers are only allowing 17.6 points per game to wide receivers this year. That is the 5th fewest in the NFL. Now, when we look at the last 4 games, only 1 wide receiver finished over 60 receiving yards against them, and that was Michael Pittman Jr. The second most was 58 yards by DJ Moore, and they have only allowed 1 wide receiver to score a touchdown in their last 4 games, and that was CeeDee Lamb, who only finished with 38 yards against the Panthers. So, like I said, it's not like they have this crazy secondary that's shutting these guys down. It's just that teams can run the ball against them, and then they're getting up by so many points that they don't have to throw the ball. So that's why there's not a lot of wide receivers, even though how great the wide receivers are. I mean, CeeDee Lamb having a phenomenal year. DJ Moore, obviously, he's got a quarterback play, but we've seen those ceiling games. And then Michael Pittman's been a steady wide receiver this year. And those guys aren't finishing over, 70 yards. So that's something to factor in, and why I would definitely consider not playing DeAndre Hopkins on Sunday. Moving into the final segment, the top starts and sits at tight end. My top start of the week, I am going to go with David Njoku against the Broncos. The Broncos are giving up 10.2 points per game. That is the most allowed in the NFL. We finally have a team that has reached back into the double-digit marks as far as points per game allowed this season to tight ends. Over their last 4 games, the Broncos have actually allowed 3 different tight ends to finish over 50 receiving yards against them, and they've given up 2 tight end touchdowns over their last 4 games. So the fact that they're giving up double-digit points per game, that screams that, and then they're giving up a lot of yards over the last 4 games to tight ends. My second start, this could be a sneaky streaming tight end if you need one, and if you missed out on somebody that you were trying to get off the waivers, I would consider Pat Freiermuth against the Bengals. Bengals are giving up 8.6 points per game. That's tied for the 3rd most allowed. Now, over the last 2 games for Pat Fryermuth in his career, he's finished over 75 yards against that Cincinnati defense. And then he's played the Bengals 4 times, and he has 2 touchdowns in his career against this Cincy defense. Now, over the last 4 games, the Bengals defense have allowed 3 different tight ends to finish over 70 receiving yards. Now, they have not allowed a tight end to score a touchdown in the last 4 games, but you do have to factor in one of those games is last Thursday night when Mark Andrews got hurt, I think late in the first quarter, maybe that was the second quarter. So you got to think maybe Andrews would have got a touchdown against them, but Fryermuth has got 75 plus yards in the last 2 games against them. Over the last 4 games, they've given up 70 plus receiving yards to 3 different tight ends. So that's why I think he's a very, especially in those daily lineups, he's probably going to be pretty cheap to put in your lineups. So I would definitely consider having him in those daily lineups this weekend. Now, a couple tight ends are in my top 6. These guys have been streaming tight ends at this time throughout the season in seasonal leagues, and then these would be names I would not want to have in my lineups, trying to go for a cheap tight end play in my daily lineups. So let's just go ahead and go over these really quickly. Michael Mayer against the Chiefs. The Chiefs are only giving up 4.6 points per game to tight ends this year. That is tied for the 4th fewest allowed in the league. Now, over their last 4 games, the most receiving yards that a tight end has finished against the Chiefs is 26 receiving yards. And they've only given up 1 tight end touchdown over the last 4 games. So if you do decide to play Mayer, he's going to be a touchdown dependent play on Sunday. My final sit of this week, I'm going to go with Tyler Higbee against the Cardinals. Cardinals are only giving up 5.4 points per game to tight ends this year. That's the 7th fewest in the NFL. Now, as far as Higbee, these like I mentioned with Kieran Williams, right? The Rams and Cardinals played earlier this season, and Higbee only finished with 18 receiving yards. In his career, he only averages 34.4 receiving yards against Arizona. And over the last 5 times that he's played the Cardinals, he has not scored a touchdown. Now, over the last 4 games, the Arizona defense, the most yardage a tight end has gained against them is 40 receiving yards, and that was Mark Andrews. But they have allowed 3 tight end touchdowns over the last 4 games. So if you get a whim to maybe stream him, I do feel like that touchdown is going to be what carries you. But I would definitely avoid having Higbee in my lineups this weekend. So yeah, that is my top starts and sits for Week 12. If there is any players I did not speak about in this video, as always, guys, get into the comments, get into a DM, or shoot me a text if you got my number, and I always try to get back to you as soon as I can. If you guys enjoyed this video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, follow, retweet, or repost, or whatever it's called these days. So share it out there to your friends. I hope you guys enjoy your Thanksgiving. I hope you get a big win. We got 3 more games until those playoffs start, so you gotta win out to lock up your spot, unless you're been undefeated this season. I'm gonna hop off here. You guys enjoy your day, night, evening, whenever you're watching this morning. Peace out. Talk to you next week.